Good evening, folks. This is writer and director Tennyson E Stead of Quantum Theory, founding member of 8-Sided Films, here with another 8-Sided blog. And there's a topic that came up during one of my acting blogs earlier this month or last month when I referred to something called mugging, and I figured it's a good time as any to take a step back and explain why mugging is and why it doesn't work as an acting technique. So if you're not from the theater community, it's probably a term you haven't heard before. But in contemporary thought about how acting works, an actor's job is to take the core action of a story and propel it forward by adding a motivation to it and pursuing that action with a sense of truth and a sense of motivation to its ultimate completion, and to push through any obstacles and any conflicts that stand in the way of that action. So, for example, if a story is about how an actor, or how a character rather, found their true love, then looking for that true love would probably be the core action of the story. And all the complications that arise, all the things that family members throw at that person, all the bad romance that comes their way becomes the conflict and the thing that's in their way of finding that one true love. So they've got to go looking, find the person they can connect with, and then build a relationship with that person. So, playing an action is the core of what acting is, okay? Your job is to do the thing that's in front of you to do with as much honesty from the perspective of the character themselves as possible. Your job is to understand where this person is coming from in a very specific sense. Give yourself a bunch of habits and a bunch of, complications that the character would be experiencing as they pursue this, so that when you do the thing, you're doing it in a way that's not generic, but it's specific to the way that this character is, and you create a performance that only you could have created because you're bringing your observations about life into your body. You're bringing your own training and your own talent and all the things that make you a good actor to that work, okay? So, mugging is when we distract from the action of the story by trying to show the audience something else. And there's really 3 basic kinds of mugging. And I'm going to come right out and tell you as well, a lot of the time actors wind up mugging not because they've been taught badly and not because they don't know better, but because they're directed to. And we're going to talk a little bit about handling bad direction in a future video, but one of the first kinds of mugging that we tend to see a lot of today, and oftentimes this is coming from a director's perspective about how a scene should work, is pushing the tone of a story, okay? When a character or when a person even does a thing that they have to do, whether it's building a rocket ship or winning a war or a battle more specifically, or pursuing their true love, by and large, unless there's something really wrong with this person, they're not doing it in such a way as to deliberately communicate specific things about themselves or the world that they're in to anyone who might be observing them do this. They're doing it with as much urgency and as much sincerity as possible. So, when we push a performance practice like creating a special voice to help establish a tone, or eliminating certain responses from our behavior to establish a certain tone, it actually takes us away from the action of the story that we're trying to pursue. Now, that's not to say that you don't pursue actions one way versus another in certain stories. If, one of the things that makes up your character and who they are is the world that they live in. Okay? So you have to acknowledge that if you're living in a war-torn environment and life is very hard for your character, that you're going to laugh at different things than a person who grew up in suburban America and has had a very easy life. You're going to find different things humorous, and you're going to have different emotional responses to things, okay? But you're also not going to layer a sort of gritty overtone to all of your actions just because you live in a war-torn environment. That's not something people do. You're not going to try and communicate that you've been affected by this war-torn environment. You just either have or have not been affected in various ways. So when you push a gritty tone, when you push a dark tone, when you push a comical tone or a whimsical tone, you're actually taking away from the action of the story, and you're pulling the audience out of the experience of empathizing with you. That's one kind of mugging, okay? You're pushing a tone. You can also, in the very same way, push emotions. Directors who come from advertising, by and large, will ask actors to mug emotions, and not realizing that it's not productive, okay? And what that means is asking someone to play happy, asking someone to play upset, okay? When this happens, it's because the actor or the director involved in creating this scene doesn't actually understand how motivation works. So, people don't do things because they are happy. They don't do things because they are upset. They do things because they want certain things or need certain things. And oftentimes when we want or need a certain thing, the great thing about acting and the great thing about performance when you're working for motivation is that you actually have a lot of different, sometimes conflicting emotions about that want or need. Wanting something or needing something can feel great and also frustrating. It can feel exciting because you're engaged in the possibility of what could be if you're pursuing the want or need for a love, or the want or need even for basic survival stuff. Sometimes, finding the thing we want or need the most can be simultaneously a letdown and it can be funny. When we're starving to death and we find food, sometimes people laugh in that moment because it's hilarious that this happened to be what they found. Maybe they found something to eat that they weren't expecting. Maybe it's much better than what they were willing to settle for, and just the fact that that exists is hilarious to them in that moment. When you pursue the actual job of getting what you want, if you're a starving person, you need to find food, and you find food, depending on what that food is. It could be you could have any number of, you're probably going to experience relief, but it might be hilarious to you that you feel relieved. If you're playing the emotion of desperation in that moment, you cancel out all of those extra possibilities. You cancel out all of those extra impulses just to give the audience a clear line on what emotion you're trying to communicate to them. When, ironically, if you just let go of the mugging, you let go of needing to push that emotion on them, the fact that your emotions are much more complex than you would expect by reading it on paper, the audience can identify with that complexity and they'll actually empathize with you much more completely. So mugging emotion is bad because it actually prevents the audience from connecting with what you're going through, because the simplicity of it doesn't make sense to them. Whereas the complexity of what you would actually be experiencing if you weren't pushing that emotion would pull them into the scene much more completely. The third thing that actors mug is actually much harder to detect unless you've spent a lot of time performing yourself. But actors will also mug, and this is something that tends not to come from directors. This is something actors do out of pride. They will mug the work itself. So, any kind of acting process that helps you get into the moment of a scene, that helps you penetrate what your character is experiencing, is built of habits, and those habits are taught in steps. Any given teaching method is going to start with steps. And, frankly, I haven't studied a lot of these methods myself, but the first step could very well be listen. Listen to what the other person is saying to you. You've got to find a way to build it into your habits to internalize what the other actor is giving you, so that you can have a feeling about it, so that you can have an emotional reaction, so that you can start building a list of impulses and have something that you can do in the scene. So listen, somehow internalize, really mull it over, let it mix into you, and then produce a response. Okay, so that would be 3 steps if you were doing the sort of kindergarten method. You know what I'm saying? If you had an actor and you were working with them, right? Well, actors, who get caught up in the fact that people love watching them work, people love the fact that they're being fooled, will sometimes break that process down in their performance, and they'll show you the listening, and then they'll show you the mulling, and then they'll show you the response, so that the audience can see all the hard work that went into providing the performance that they're getting. And it's that when people complain about seeing the acting, that's what they mean, is mugging the performance. Okay? So what you need to do in that situation is let go of your need to demonstrate for the audience what you're doing for them. They don't need to know what you're doing for them. They just need to see what you're doing for them. They don't need to know how much work went into it, and they never will. And they might not appreciate it, and that's okay. You let that part go, and you give them a great performance. So bring yourself back to the action. Bring yourself back to what you're doing. Find honest motivations for doing it. And let that be enough. And so that's what mugging is. Mugging is when you show the audience the thing that you want to show them, whether it's the work, whether it's the emotions of a scene, or whether it's the tone that you're trying to establish. You show the audience what it is that you want them to see, instead of finding your way into an honest motivation and then finding the most urgent possible reason for doing the thing that you're doing as an actor. You know, whether it is looking for love, whether it is diffusing a nuclear bomb, whatever the case may be, your reason for doing it has to be the most powerful, most motivating reason. So finding that, and having the habits of finding that without having to, actively go looking for it, being able to pull that off the page, doing whatever research you have to do to fill in the gaps. But you want to get to the point as an actor where you've done it so many times, you're so practiced at it by doing it over and over and over again that those breakdowns come naturally to you just whenever you're presented with a conflict. And then finding all the specific emotions, all the specific reasons, all the specific angles into this situation possible, again, from having done it over and over again and building the habits of identifying those acting opportunities, right? And then having the ability to make the interesting choices and the complicated choices and the informed choices in that space, in the moments that your performance becomes layered and becomes intriguing. And yes, you might not give the audience exactly what you think they should see, but you need to let go of what you think they should see. That's not any of our jobs. The audience is another character in the story. They'll bring their preconceived notions to the show, right? And they'll see what they want to see. They'll see what it is in them to see. And we accept that. Or we're giving up the best part of our job. It's the most exciting part, and it's also the biggest challenge. Our job is to make it so specific and so complex, and yet so devoted to that action, and so clearly that story, that the audience winds up challenging themselves, that they can't avoid all the complications, not because we're throwing them in their face, but because there are so many of them that you can't make it through without encountering something that challenges your preconceived notion about what you're watching. And having all that specificity, having all those layers, means you can rewatch it from that new place of understanding and find yet another detail that you hadn't noticed before or didn't pick up on that challenges your preconceived notions all over again. That's where that comes from, is specificity in performance. And mugging is the enemy of specificity. So stop showing tone, stop showing emotion. Doesn't mean you can't feel emotion or have emotion, but stop throwing it in the audience's face. It's showing your emotion is not the point of the scene. Doing the thing that you're in the scene to do is the point of the scene. And stop showing the work. Don't worry if the audience doesn't see how much hard work went into this performance. Just let them see the performance. And if some of them decide to take up acting, and if some of them decide to pursue the craft, they'll find out how hard it was. Just like you did. And that's probably a good place to stop this video. We're just about 5 or 6 weeks out from being able to present the very first episode of Declassified. Our set is under construction. It's taken a little bit extra time, but it's going to be worth it. And that's going to be the story, our first season of Declassified, which is the series of records and documentary footage from government projects that are fictional government projects documented in the 60s and 70s. Will be about Project Icarus, which is about a one-man, 8-year, one-way mission to Saturn's moon of Titan in an Apollo command module, propelled by nuclear rocketry, away from the Earth, and this astronaut, Wick Pierce, trying to keep himself and his spacecraft in working order over the course of the 8-year journey so he can arrive at Titan and attempt the landing reliably. We're We're excited to bring it to you. If you want to find out more about it as it comes out, give us a subscribe down here. If you like this video, give us a like. Thank you very much for joining me, and have yourself a great evening. Take good care. Bye-bye.